Thank you for that introduction, Tracy, and thank you also for the invitation to speak here this morning. For those of you who have read the bios in the intro pack will know, and otherwise I'll tell you anyway. My day job is to support management teams in developing and delivering growth strategies, principally in the consumer and retail sectors. And these projects, by their nature, need to address the future market environment. And as a result, they tend to look out over a 10 to 15-year time horizon. And this morning, I'm going to outline some of the main themes that have arisen in recent work. We'll also get around to explaining what she is doing and why it's a good time. This story starts a way back with the post-war recovery and with the sustained Western market expansion, which brought us 60 years of big media, big brands, and big retailers. And in that time, the retail playbook became very well defined, and it looked like this. Building the citadels, locking down the physical space which had the strongest footfall, stretching out the proposition to cover ever more categories to capture consumer share of wallet, improving margins by switching out third-party brands and replacing them with retailer own-label product, and more recently, by offering, sometimes in a fairly token way, some form of online or e-commerce proposition. But it's clear from the acceleration in bad news. Here, these are headlines from major UK retailers over the last 6 months, but the same trends are evident in Europe and in the US as well, that model isn't working as well as it once did. So in order to develop the new playbook, we need to understand what's going on. What are the key structural trends? How are they going to play out? What impact will that have on the retail environment? And also, what's the toolkit of responses that retailers can make? And I'm going to step through some of these this morning. In terms of key structural changes, we think of 4 major global megatrends, each of which is shaping the retail and consumer environment. So, aging is creating new needs for verticals like healthcare and financial services. Internationalization is enabling a more complex trading web for both buying and selling goods and services. Urbanization is creating a burgeoning middle class and shifting the growth in the global economy eastwards. But as you can see from the cunning tell in orange, we think it's technology which is likely to have the most profound impact on the retail sector over the next 10 to 15 years. And that's because it is driving a fundamental change in the nature of consumer shopping experiences in 2 ways. Perfect information and immediate low-cost delivery. And I'm going to explore a couple of these next. A precursor and a requirement for each of these is communications infrastructure, and that's on the cusp of a major step change through 5G. That offers data speeds which are, broadly speaking, equivalent to optical fiber into the home. So roughly 1,000 megs a second, up from the tens which people typically experience under 4G. And that will enable consumers to be basically always connected. Beyond that, 3 AI extraction technologies, natural language processing for text, computer vision for images, speech recognition for language, are creating information that machine learning can interpret, structure, and filter for products and services that match individuals' personal preferences and enable them to get best value for money available. Now, I'm sure many of you experience this day-to-day already with things like Amazon Recommends and Netflix, which are exemplars of the current state of the art. And these types of techniques are also already being incorporated into the travel sector, which is using them to drive trip recommendations. Interestingly, Amazon itself is also then taking the capability it has in these algorithms and now deploying them back into more traditional physical retail. So last week it opened a concept store in New York called 4-Star, and the range in that store is built up in the first instance from learnings around what local purchases have been made online, and then built out from there. One way to think about what's happening here is that the development of AI over the next decade is going to change the nature of the man-machine relationship. So today, from predominantly assisted, in which man analyzes data directly, generally speaking, and makes inferences from that. Meanwhile, the machine scurries around in the background, retrieving, organizing data, and making it fit for human consumption. To a situation in which man will be enhanced by the machine on a more systematic basis. The machine will still do its scurrying, bring the data up, but it will be the one making the inferences, drawing conclusions, making recommendations, and doing that in a way and at a scale that humans, frankly, will never achieve. If we go back to Netflix, which I mentioned a moment ago, I mean, the numbers are huge. They have about 100 million subscribers. They have about 250 million active profiles on the back of that 100 million. And they do tag pretty much every move that people make, what they're watching, when they're watching it, how they're watching it, what they watched before and after. And they're linking that to very detailed tags around the nature of what the content actually is, which drives them to about a couple of thousand taste profiles, and each individual user is then tagged to combinations of those use profiles, and those drive what you're served up in terms of genre recommendations and the actual sequence of the recommendations that come up. If you think of the numbers involved there, humans are never going to get involved in any of that stuff. It's usually gut feel, I think. These types of people like that kind of show. This is a more sophisticated, ever-learning basis on which to make and develop products and services. That perfect information, sorry, I'll come back to her in a sec. That perfect information is going to be served up in a way through virtual and augmented reality, which is going to make the shopping experience more engaging and more entertaining. Now, some of you may have already used IKEA's Place app, which helps you visualize furniture in your home by scanning fairly accurately the space that's available and then searching through the catalog for suggestions. It's functional. It's convenient for sure as well, and avoids major errors, but I don't think it passes really the test of engagement and entertainment. For a better sense of that, we're back to what she's up to. I'd encourage you to have a look at this technology. It's one that's called FX Mirror. It's developed by a South Korean visual effects software house. And it gives a much better sense for how augmented reality will be able to amplify and reinforce and improve the overall shopping experience. Unfortunately, I couldn't take any of their clips and cut it down to an acceptable length, so I'm afraid you will need to go and look at it yourselves. So that's how technology is going to bring and present perfect information to consumers. How about immediate low-cost deliveries? The cost of, one of the major blockers to the level of e-commerce penetration of retail spend is the high cost of direct-to-customer fulfillment for small orders that don't fit through the letterbox. there are a multitude of options that are available, but it's very hard to get an individual order to a customer where they want it for less than $3 to $5 as a minimum, and usually significantly more than that. And that is a problem. If you imagine a product that's for sale for 5 or 10 euros at a 40% gross margin, you've got 1 or 2 euros of profit to play with, and it all just gets taken up in actually delivering it to a customer. And that's one of the key things that prevents retailers from spending a lot of time developing an e-commerce proposition. The crucial step is to get rid of the expensive bit in the service, and that's the human driver. There are numerous autonomous vehicle solutions under development from both startups that you'll never have heard of, as well as more traditional vehicle OEMs. And many retailers, again, this is just a UK set, who are undertaking trials. That is Starship on the left, which can carry about 5 to 10 kilos, and Neuro, I think, on the right, which is currently in trials with Kroger in the States. The technology which will enable this is basically there in the States. I guess deployments potentially expected in the early 2020s. In Europe, there's a bit more machine learning to go because the street networks are more complicated, which places it more likely in the mid-2020s. But it is coming. And when it arrives, it will dramatically reduce the cost of delivery of goods into the home by 75% or so. For the kind of technology we were looking at just over the page, and then by significantly more in a land in which we get to drones. And that will enable, we think, small orders to be delivered economically viably to individual customers. When you take perfect information and low-cost delivery, able to get to customers within their desired wait time window, which is about 1 or 2 hours. Those pressures are going to drive a pretty much relentless pressure on all types of retail categories. Low touch, so that's commodity, highly specified product, will reduce in terms of its physical presence in stores as low-cost delivery becomes possible, and there's a reduced need to see and touch the product before purchase. But for high-touch product as well, these aren't going to be, so this is more experiential products, these aren't going to be immune from the same pressures because AI will aid personal selection, as we've seen, and virtual reality will provide more product experience online. And as those pressures build, it's easy to envisage that retailers may eventually polarize into two models to characterize at extremes. On the one hand, super value, so scale-based, increasingly international, with a proposition that is built around, but by no means limited to low-touch product. And on the other hand, experiential, so focused around high-touch product, with a retail model which is designed to engage, to educate, and to entertain. Now, for experiential, it's clear that the bar is going to rise as technology improves. You can start to see kind of baby steps towards the type of concepts that might develop. If you go to sort of Nike in Soho, you'll see on the top floor they've got a nice place where you can go and play ball. And also, if you go to some of the newer shopping centers in Asia, particularly in Seoul or in Singapore, where you can see entertainment parks with shopping, or shopping centers which are combined with community arts and sports centers, these types of things. But it is going to be a very, very powerful and dramatic change. So the question is, well, what impact does that have on retailers and retail economics? It's probably useful at this stage to recap on the starting point. Consumer spend on through online channels has been growing fast. Best estimates are that $350 billion has migrated out of stores across the US and the major European markets over the last 4 years, and that's growing at about 18% per annum. But it's also clear that that's just the beginning. The online penetration of many retail categories is still low, often single digit for those sort of higher touch, more engaging products that I was talking about. But that is bound to accelerate as those technology drivers that I've been talking about work through in terms of an ability for individuals to find their perfect product without actually getting up off the sofa, and for that product to be served up to them to the front door without going out on a shopping trip. It's tricky to know quite how far and how fast, but you can easily talk yourself into situations for low-touch product, where current penetration is roughly high teens to low 20% on the average and higher in specific categories, that it could reach 30, 40, 50% plus over a 10 to 15 year period. And for high-touch product, which is typically in single-digit or low teens penetration at the moment, that might increase towards 20 or 30%. And when it does, the impact on standalone store economics, as one can imagine, is profound because there's a double whammy. Decreasing sales as customers shift their purchasing online, and margin pressure due to the price transparency that the super value retail model brings. Here, as an illustration, we were trying to mobilize one client team to get on and do something by looking at the impact on their store portfolio, it's about 1,000 stores or so, of a change in penetration online of about 25%. So for them, it was from about 4 or 5% currently to about 20 or 30%. And as you can see, 75% of their current physical estate would be underwater at that stage, based on current rental charges. It is going to be a massive, massive impact. So what is it that retailers can do? Well, it sounds overly simplistic, but as the bar rises, it becomes ever more important to be able to be, well, it becomes crucial to be very, very good at something that's important to consumers. So step one is to clarify the proposition, and to pass the test of why am I relevant to my target consumers' lives today, and from that to make choices around product and service participation, and then on to range thereafter. In some cases, no change required, all well and good, proceed to step two. But in most cases, that isn't the nature of the change that's required. Again, as you can see illustratively for one client recently, that thinking process led to a halving of the current SKUs, so the individual items that were on offer in the stores. So that was taking about 20,000 individual items out of stores, as well as developing a plan for a phased withdrawal from 3 of its leading categories. That type of, it's tough thinking to do, and to encourage management teams to actually take product off the shelves is quite hard yards. Step two is then to reconfigure the physical store formats and the size of the chain. Now, stores are going to be a lot smaller in future, substantially so, And there was likely to be a gradual progression towards a type of brand expo model that would combine the technology we saw in FX retail with stocking key lines back of house and fulfilling the majority of orders through hub direct to customer. It is high touch and high frequency product which will be the last survivor on the high street. So serving convenience and distressed purchases, although there are very few products when you get to think about it which genuinely are distress in nature. In other words, they need to be available immediately rather than next day. That migration for retailers is monumental because of the embedded organization in the stores, the IT infrastructure, the logistics to support it. So it is very hard to affect much change in less than a 5-year window, and generally speaking is no less than a 10 to 15-year program of change. And combining those changes with the need to incorporate that transformational delivery infrastructure solutions that I mentioned as they become available means that retailers have a very, very full agenda for change over the next decade in order to adapt to the new world. A closing thought, where does that all lead to then? Well, as for a similar transformational migration 60 years ago, it's clear that not all of the current participants are going to survive the journey to the new world. It's very easy, and we find this amongst our client base, to get hooked into the downsides. But it is important, important not only for their survival, to think much more, try to get into the mindset of thinking about the opportunities, because unprecedented change certainly also brings the opportunity to reinvent and recreate new organizations. And with that thought, I will leave you. Thank you very much indeed.